Well, as Saxon said, my name's Ben Freakley, and you are my people. And what I mean by that is, before I got into the sports psych world, I spent 13 years as a coach. I was a college soccer coach and youth coach from really 2001 all the way to 2014. And I love being on these presentations. Saxon, thanks again for bringing me on, because a lot of the things that I try and bring to these group presentations are really born out of things that I wish I would have done a little bit better when I was a coach. Bottom line, what we're here to talk about today is how do we communicate and connect even better with our athletes? And I want to be deliberate with the words even better, because I believe a lot of you as coaches are already doing this really, really well. And I hope that we can add some tools today that would help us connect at an even deeper level. So what I want to do with the chat really quick is I'm going to ask everybody to answer this question. In the chat, what is a symbol or picture of how you want to be known as a coach? What's a symbol or picture? And you can put it in a word. So for example, if it's a hammer, I want to be really, really tough. That would be something you could put in there. But put in the chat a word that's a symbol or picture of how you want to be known as a coach. Family, guiding, impactful, caring, fair, servant, heart, fair and caring, relationship builder, honest, present. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Respected. Yeah. Want to feel respected. Life-changing. Thank you, Paul. So these are great. These are great. Life-changing, present, respected, honest, relationship builder, leader. Thank you, Ricky. Thanks for everybody for jumping in on those. These to me, these types of conversations are the ones when I talk to coaches. One of the questions that I like to ask the most is, hey, what did you not or what are you not getting enough of in your coach development journey? And one of the biggest responses that I hear all the time is some version of coach-athlete relationships, player management strategies, communication strategies, any of these above. And I really hope today that this conversation helps hit at that. This is my 10th year doing full-time sport and performance psychology. As I mentioned, I spent a long time as a college coach. And in 2014, I made the full-time transition to doing full-time sport and performance psychology work. And my first full-time gig was with the Army Rangers. And what I learned there very quickly in watching these guys operate was, wow, a lot of their ability to lead well and create great teams is based in communication skills. From there, I spent 5 years with the Toronto Blue Jays, where I ended up doing my doctoral work in sport and performance psychology. But along the way, my master's focus was on leadership perspectives of college Division I men's soccer coaches. And I asked one pinnacle question: hey, what's more important, accomplishing tasks and achieving goals, or developing and maintaining strong interpersonal relationships? And the coaches that had been to Final Fours, the coaches that had won national championships, the theme was this: hey, Ben, for us, or for me, what I found is the more we focus on building and maintaining strong interpersonal relationships, the more people want to help us accomplish tasks and achieve goals. This fire that you see in front of you right now is my answer to that question that I asked you to put in the chat. What is a symbol that you want to describe the way that you are as a coach? And for me, I think about this a lot. I talk to my friends about this a lot. I have a couple friends that are professional coaches that I talk to about this a lot. And for me, it's a fire. And the reason why it's a fire is because a fire, especially on a cold night, is something that people are not in a rush to leave. They're attracted to a fire. People can stand around a fire and have great conversations. Fires provide warmth, they provide comfort, and they also provide light. And I think in the context of what we do as coaches, we want to provide warmth to players, we want to be approachable to players, but we also want to provide light as well in terms of raising their self-awareness, in terms of helping players self-reflect. And the reason that I bring this up is one of my processes as a sport and performance psychology consultant is anytime I'm going in to work with the team, or anytime I'm about to do a one-on-one session with somebody like you as a coach, or one of my clients as an athlete, I will close my eyes and I will visualize this right here. That really drops me. One of the coaches, thank you for everybody that answered in the chat. One of the coaches put in the word present. And this is one of the things that really helps me get present. And so if you don't hear anything else about what we're here to talk about today, it's I am going to offer some evidence-based skills and strategies that we can use to help create life and game-changing conversations for our athletes. And so let's kind of get into that. Um, I don't, hands up, or you can put in the chat, anybody read or heard of this book? This is just kind of doubling down here. This is from the longest standing research from Harvard University. This is spanning 5 different generations. It's the longest scientific study of happiness ever conducted. And what they found is that relationships keep us happier and healthier. What kinds of relationships? All kinds. And you all, I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know. As coaches, you're probably well aware that in your athlete's journey, there is perhaps not a single more important relationship that has an impact on their well-being and performance than the one they have with their coaches. This has been studied. There's a researcher out of England named Dr. Sophia Jowett, who has spent her whole life studying coach-athlete relationships. And one of the findings in there is what I just told you, that of all the relationships an athlete will have along their journey in sport, the one that has the most impact on their well-being and performance is the one that they have with you as coaches. So what I think is interesting about what we're talking about here is oftentimes as coaches, and for those of you that are on camera, you can head nod if you agree, or you can shake your head if you disagree. This may be a hot take, but I think a lot of times the way we coach as coaches, it was or is significantly informed by how we got coached when we were athletes. What do you all think of that? Head nod for agree. Yep, Chris is giving the agreement. Ryan's agreeing. Yes, Megan has even come on screen to agree live from the kitchen. I love it. So yeah, a lot of how we coach, a lot of our coach behaviors are ones. I know I did this early on as a coach. My methods for punishment, my methods for fitness, the way I wanted my team to play, all of those were things that I adopted from my coaching mentors, or when I reflected back to when I was a player. So what's the challenge with that? Here's the challenge. Most of us grew up under a very directive style of coaching. I know I did. And what I mean by directive is this: most of my and our coaching experiences and experiences in sport were our coaches instructing us, giving us feedback, giving us advice, offering guidance. And that's known as a very directive style or a pushing style of coaching. And again, for those of us that I can actually kind of see some nonverbals, hands up. Was this kind of your experience that you got when you were coming through as an athlete? And feel free to come off mute if you'd like to, Scott or Chris, anybody. Any thoughts? Okay, maybe maybe too soon. We're still warming up. That's fine. I'm used to this. So this may have been a barrier to really developing strong connection. So what's at the other end of this? If this is a pushing style, then how do we get to more of a non-directive or a pulling style of coaching, where in our toolkit we ask questions, in our toolkit we learn to reflect back to our athletes, or we learn to, really importantly, listen to understand versus listen to respond. A final point that I'd make on this is that a directive style in coaching is not bad. I'm not looking at this and saying one is better or one is more productive. What I want to suggest to all of us is we have many top tools in the toolkit, and there are at times where engaging in a non-directive style has an impact on the motivation of our athletes. And we can dig into that here. I'm going to be talking through a practice or a skill set called motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing started around the 80s, and it actually started in the field of clinical counseling, where addictions counselors were trying to help in group settings convince people that their addictions were ruining their lives. And what they found was, by telling addicts how they were ruining their bodies, how they were ruining their minds, how they were ruining their relationships, what these experts found was that by telling these people these things, it did not have an impact on their behavioral changes. In fact, in a lot of cases, the harder they tried to push education and reasons for change, a lot of the people in these group settings got even more defensive on why they were engaging in their practices. So they came up with a different approach called motivational interviewing. And thankfully today, it's made its way over 50 years all the way into sport, and it is becoming really commonplace. In fact, one of you that put in the group chat a symbol or a word to describe how you want to be a coach, you said guide. And that's about the most perfect word that we could use to describe what an MI coach is. What's motivational interviewing? It's a collaborative and purposeful conversation to strengthen motivation by guiding someone to say for themselves why and how they might change. So the key words in that, it's collaborative, it's guiding, and it's strengthening motivation. The MI coach, those of us that really want to go deep with this and use it in our day-to-day practice, the MI coach looks at that athlete of ours as the expert on their own life. If I were coaching Chris or Scott or Cassidy, I'd say this person in front of me already has all the strengths and resources and tools in the world to be the performer they want to be. And it's going to be my job to pull that out of them. And this is the last part of that definition. It's supported by information and advice as needed, which means as a coach, it still leaves plenty of room for us to drop in and offer our observations and our experiences. The difference is, just like we see in the definition here, we put that at the end instead of starting with our advice and our ideas. Another definition of MI, again, is a collaborative way about talking with people about change and growth to strengthen their own motivation and commitment. It's about talking with people to strengthen their own motivation and commitment. Why is it used in sport? Builds trust, improves decision-making, empowers change. And I'm only going through these quickly because I want to get to some of the tools and the skills today. And it resolves ambivalence, can deepen commitment, and can discover intrinsic motivation. Now, I want to stop just for a minute and talk about this piece of resolving ambivalence. When the athlete that we work with, when they're not sure about which direction to go or which choice to make, there's something in the field of psychology, and many of you may have heard of this. It's called the stages of change model. It goes from pre-contemplation to contemplation to preparation to action to maintenance, all the way to relapse. And so by using a motivational interviewing approach, getting really, really curious with an athlete, learning how to ask really good questions, we can help them to say for themselves, this is what I really want for my life in sport. And I'm working through this right now. There's a 14-year-old athlete that I am working with in Georgia. This young man is a really competitive soccer player, and he's in a really tough spot right now where the team that he's on is constantly annihilated. The commitment level, according to the player, of his teammates is lower, and he's contemplating, with his parents' support, pulling back from his team environment and spending 6 months of doing individual training on his own to try and get as good as he can be, and then going to different guest playing events with teams. Now, as you're hearing this, you're probably formulating your own opinions on this. He should do this. He should do that. And I even had my own as he's sharing this with me. But getting back to this piece of resolving ambivalence, a motivational interviewing approach to this would be staying really curious, trying to keep my own opinions out of it for right now, and try and help this player with questions like, what would be the best case scenario of staying with your team? What would be the worst case scenario? What would be the best case scenario of going and training out on your own? What would be the worst case scenario of that? Really helping him work through the ambivalence, because I can see in talking to him, he's not quite sure what's the exact right approach to make. But instead of me giving him that answer of you should do this or you should do that, it's trying to stay in that pulling style that I showed earlier, with asking those open-ended questions and trying to reflect back to him what I think his deep motivations are for possibly making a change like that. Motivational interviewing is also really backed up by something, and I don't want to get too nerdy here, but it's backed up by something called the self-determination theory. Anybody familiar with SDT and any of its origins? This is something I strongly recommend every coach to dig into a little bit. Bottom line, keep your eyes on the green zone, because motivational interviewing helps athletes get to the deepest level of motivation, which is, as we all have probably heard during our coaching career, is when things are intrinsic, when the source of the motivation comes from within, then athletes are a lot more likely to be more persistent toward their goals. They're a lot more likely to be more committed to their goals or their teammates or their reasons for staying on the team. And so motivational interviewing is great because it is working in this green zone right here. The self-determination theory promotes this idea that for motivation to be most intrinsically there and present, there's three factors that we can do as coaches and leaders to really prime it. The first is autonomy. It's giving an individual a sense of control. As coaches, you know what this is like. I don't know the levels here, if it's high school or college or youth or a mix, but you know what it feels like to have control over how your team plays, when they practice, the level of competition, what you're going to do in training. You know what it feels like to be able to drive that, and you know what it feels like when that's directed onto you. The second primer of motivation is competence. It's having a mastery level experiences. And so when we ask our athletes, what's a skill that you really want to master? What's a part of your game that you want to take to the next level? We are priming competence. That was one of the first questions that we would ask when I worked at the Toronto Blue Jays and we drafted a new player. We'd bring this player in, and during draft camp, which would typically be in late June, this athlete would sit down with our farm director, our director of player development, and this would be one of the questions that was asked. Hey, what's a part of your game, whether it be a skill part or a physical part of your game? It could be a strengthening a particular part of your body, adding a pitch if you were a pitcher, but it was asking the player, where do you want to get better? And then the third thing that primes motivation and works into the self-determination theory and motivational interviewing is something called relatedness. It's that deep psychological need to belong. And so when we as coaches are going to our athletes and engaging them in conversation about their life, about what it's like to be in their sport, about what it's like to be on the team, or about what it's like to be their age. When we promote these belonging cues, it can have a massive, massive impact on their intrinsic motivation. I've got a 14-year-old son right now who's playing football, and every time his positional coach sends him a text, he shows it to me. Hey, Dad, look what Coach Washington sent. Hey, Dad, look what Coach Washington sent. These little text messages from Coach Washington about great job today and hey, you're really putting in the work ethic are affirming my son and deepening his commitment to want to continue to show up for the football team. Motivational interviewing is also backed up by this quote that's over 400 years old. People are better persuaded by the reasons they have themselves discovered than by those that come into the mind of others. As motivational interviewing skills grow with us as coaches, we're going to become experts at mining for the deepest levels of motivation and commitment. And that's when we can just see a next level performance, commitment, and motivation from athletes. So, okay, let's get into, and I know I'm kind of running through this pretty quick. I wish this Saxton was a 3-hour live workshop because we could practice some of this stuff together. So the spirit of motivation, motivational interviewing. Why do we start with this? I'll tell you why. The founders of motivational interviewing said, without the spirit, the skills of MI are nothing more than a parlor trick. And we're going to get to the skills second. But the spirit of motivational interviewing has 4 key skills around it. The first is collaboration. So when I'm working with a player, if I were coming in to work with Ryan's team or Jody's team, the first thing that I would want to do with those athletes is really make it feel like a collaboration. I love the phrase, people are more likely to commit to what they help create. People are more likely to commit to what they help create. So when we're talking to an athlete or a team about what are our goals, what is success for us, when they leave that conversation, did it feel like we were doing it together, or did it feel like coach was telling us what matters? So there's got to be a spirit of collaboration. The second, there's got to be a spirit of acceptance. And this is really tough in the world of competitive sports because so much emphasis is constantly on getting better. There's so much of our job as coaches is to spot inefficiencies. It's to spot the performance gaps and to want to upskill. But the spirit of motivational interviewing suggests this idea that, hey, for this conversation right now and our work together, I accept you right now for who you are, whether it be missing a key shot in the game, missing a key moment, having a performance mistake. Basically, this strips away the conditions of worth. This idea that I'm going to be with you as your coach and support you as your coach so long as you're hitting all the requirements that I have for you performance-wise. This is, I'm going to accept you as the human being that you are on my team and in this world. The third the the spirit of motivational interviewing is evoking. And how do we do that? It's by asking really good questions where the athlete would even say back to us, I haven't thought about that before. Or coach, that's a really good question. And for us to be able to imagine what it's like to be them, to ask a question around that, something like, what would it be like if you, what would that mean to you if you led the league in this or that this year? What would it be like if you were the first player on your team, or the first player or the first person in your family to go off to college? What do you think that would mean to your parents and to your family? Those types of open-ended questions, they elicit vision for one's life. And they get them to think bigger than the moment. And the last one, and I have to say this may, for me, be the most important, and it is so tough with all the different demands that we have as coaches, but it's empathy. It is really getting present when we're talking with our athletes and trying to imagine, what is it like to be this 15-year-old sophomore softball player trying to be a daughter, a teammate, a competitor. And it's really trying to put ourselves in their shoes, really trying to get us to imagine, drop in, what are they feeling? And to get into that head and heart space and do all these other skills around empathy, collaboration, evocation, and acceptance, that's really what gives us that warm fire that suggests my coach cares for me. My coach respects me. My coach sees me as more than an athlete. And as we do that, we can also work on the skills of motivational interviewing. And I got to double down here, gang. Without the spirit, these skills feel more like an agenda. It's got to be both of them in there together. So I will take a guess. Anybody put it in the chat. It starts with an O. Motivational interviewing is getting a lot more popular. What's the first skill of motivational interviewing? Has anybody heard of this before? Anybody want to take a guess? Listening. Chris, thanks for taking a guess. The first skill is open-ended questions. This is the first skill in motivational interviewing. I can only imagine the type of soccer coach I would have been had I moved from close-ended questions like, did you do your best there, or was that our best? What could, those type of close-ended questions, moving to, what were we proud of? What are we proud of in today's performance? What did we do really, really well as a team? Hey, from this performance, what should be our focus in training over the next couple days? Those types of open-ended questions, the what questions, the where questions, the how questions, the when questions, not so much the why questions, because questions that start with why, many of you have probably heard this before, tend to put us on the defensive, right? We might not in training yell out to one of our players, why did you do that? Right? That makes them think, did I do something incorrect? It might be, tell me what you were thinking about there. What were your options in that moment? Those types of open-ended questions help the player explore, right? Or even a question like a player coming to you and you're listening for a while, and then you say, what do you need from me right now? How can I support you? Again, it kicks it back. It promotes ownership to the player. The second skill in motivational interviewing is affirmations. And I want to this is maybe a hot take, so I welcome some disagreement if we have time, but affirmations are better than praise. Praise is, I'm proud of you. I like what you did. I'm happy with what I saw right there. and it's reinforcing the player may be there to please us as the coach. And there's some truth to that, right? Players do have to perform and behave in a way that meets our philosophy, standards, team requirements, etc. I'm not knocking that. Affirming is the ability to help players see strengths in themselves they may have never seen before. It's something like the way you tracked back on defense after you gave the ball away is a level of commitment I've never seen before out of you. Right? So it's using that word commitment, it's assigning to it a behavior like tracking back. One of the pro coaches that I work with texted me after a tough loss in the MLS the other day, and he shared with me that the whole game he just continued to affirm the work ethic that a player was putting in, even when all of the outcomes weren't there, because we're not always going to get the results. So affirming is quieting our eye, looking at each player on our team and asking ourselves, what strengths, what unique character strengths does this player bring to the team? And have I reflected these back to the player? Because when they are authentic and when the player feels like we mean it, the level of motivation and desire to keep proving the coach right is just going to continue to skyrocket. The third skill is reflections, and all these spell out OARS, OARS. And there's lots of different ways that we can reflect to our athletes. We can have simple reflections. If the athlete says, coach, my jump shot, my wrist is just too stiff, right? Forgive if there's basketball coaches on the call, they're going to hate me because my terminology isn't there. But we might just reflect it's too stiff, or your wrist feels off, right? Something like really simple. Or we could go with a deeper meaning. You're frustrated because your body just isn't moving the way that you want it to. Yeah, I'm frustrated by that. So our reflections, and you can dig a little bit deeper if you want on this. There's double-sided reflections where we say things like, on one hand it's this, but on the other hand it's this, and we reflect this dichotomy to our players. We can reflect emotions when a player is talking to us. Again, the empathy piece is saying, what are they feeling right now? And we can say to them, you're pissed, you're frustrated. Immediately their heart rate will start to drop. Oh, my coach knows what I'm feeling right now. We can reflect emotions back to them, a deeper meaning, a double-sided reflection, or it can be just saying back to them exactly what they told us. And that listening statement, that statement that we say back to them that suggests, I'm listening, I'm right here with you, that lets the player know, all right, coach has my back right now. And then the last skill that we would use is summarizing. So we're having a conversation with a player. It's about their performance. Maybe it's at halftime. Maybe it's a really quick one, or maybe it's in training. And we've asked a couple open-ended questions. Maybe we've affirmed something. We've reflected along the way. And then we're tying it all together at the end. And when I first started doing motivational interviewing, probably 10 years ago, I thought it really was a rigid, linear approach like you're seeing right here. Oh, I need to ask an open-ended question. Then I need to affirm. Then I need to reflect. Then I need to summarize. But what I found is that it really needs to work more like this. And it needs to be more of kind of an organic dance. What I mean by that is the O right there. I would ask an open-ended question, and then I might make two reflections as I listen to that performer. And as I'm listening to those reflections, I might see or hear a strength, and I'm going to affirm that. That's that green A. And then I might start with another open-ended question, and then another reflection. There's no perfect science to this. The key is just, can I try on these skills? Can I really work through these spirit and skills And while I'm using the open-ended questions, the affirmations, I'm also remembering the empathy piece. And I'm also remembering the acceptance piece of who they are in this moment right here. When I was working at 1st Ranger Battalion, one of the first times I tried motivational interviewing out was with an Army Ranger who had just failed a really significant event in his life. And at this event, 2 outcomes could have happened, or 3 outcomes could have happened. He could have been selected for this different unit that he wanted to go to. He could have been completely rejected, or he could have been told, hey, you failed, but we like some of what we see, so we want you to come back at a later date. He was given that the second one, which was, you failed and you cannot come back anymore. And so sitting across from me was this really large, extremely fit, extremely frustrated human being telling me about what was going on. And I'm sitting there and I'm trying to imagine myself in his shoes, trying to imagine myself spending months training for something and failing at it. And so I'm trying to drop in to this empathetic state right now. And I say to him, this failure that you just experienced, and this was a closed-ended question, but I had a plan, does that define you? And he said no. Like, he actually sat forward in his chair like he wanted to fight me. Thankfully, he didn't. He said no. And then I followed up with no. I reflect again, using a reflection. I said no. And then I said, what does define you? And then we got into this hour-long talk around his values, around what led him to that moment, about why he joined the service anyway. And then we wrapped that back into how those character strengths, how those defining qualities could be applied to this current situation that he's facing right now with this big failure. And we were able to work through that. But prior to having those MI skills, I would have tried to take it upon myself to make him feel better. And what I realized in that moment is that really wasn't my job. It was about helping him work through the ambivalence. It was about helping him remember who he was no matter what. And so before we kind of get into some questions, if we have them, or closing this out, I do want to touch on some of the things, some of the traps that we can fall into that could get us in the way of really connecting deeply and having these life and game-changing conversations. The first is the expert information dump. It's seeing a player make a mistake or watching a player struggle, and it's going over and telling them all the things that they need to do or fix in the moment. It's back to that early slide I showed about that pushing or directive style. It's going there first. A second one that gets in the way is something called the writing reflex. The writing reflex is we're listening or we're watching a player struggle, they're coming to us with a challenge, and we tell ourselves, well, it's our job to make it right. It's my job to fix and solve this. And it's not. Motivational interviewing is, again, it's looking at that athlete and saying, they can make this right. They've got all the skills and the tools and the resources. And so it's important that we recognize the writing reflex is alive and well in all of us. Third, it's the premature focus trap, which means the player tells us one thing that may be in the way and we jump on that right away, versus pulling back, staying patient, and asking other open-ended questions. What else is going on? What else are you feeling? I've got a player right now, a pro player that I'm working with, and he hit me up because he's been having some really existential thoughts. Dude's only 19, but he's thinking about death and he's thinking about getting old. And I normalize, hey man, we all think about that. And rather than just focus in on why he's having those thoughts, I tried to help him zoom out. What else is going on in your life? Tell me about your family members. I was curious if maybe, he's got older family members with health problems and he's worried about them. And then maybe that's having him worry about his own life. But rather than just dive in on those thoughts, we really tried to zoom out together before we focused too soon, too quick on the impact those thoughts were having on his life as a performer. And then the last one, and again, this is kind of baked in and why it's tough to be a coach, is playing the role of deficit detective, where rather than just looking for what's wrong or what's in the way or what are the barriers, it's also putting on those strengths finder glasses. And yep, as coaches, we've got to have a critical eye. We've got to have a critical lens on technique and tactics. We've got to know when things are looking right or when they're off. But it's being able to take off the deficit detective hat and put on our strengths finder hat as well. So those are just a couple things that could get in the way of us really connecting deeply, deeply with the players that we coach. Again, one of you or a couple of you nailed it at the beginning with that word you want to describe you as a coach. Motivational interviewing sits right there in the middle and offers that guiding style like we talked about. And some of the just reasons I think we might want to use this, it changes the way we have these are ones that we have all the time, right? That player that isn't getting a fair shake and feels like they're, being treated unfairly or they want to play more. What would it look like if we used motivational interviewing to even start with the empathy, to say, yeah, you don't think I'm giving you a fair shake. You really feel like you've got a lot to offer the team and I'm not giving you a chance. Even just affirming or acknowledging that starts to change the conversation. A new player joining the team. One of the pro players that I work with right now from Senegal doesn't speak English and flat out said to me, Ben, and I had to have a translator there, but Ben, I just haven't really felt like I belong yet. Haven't really felt like the real me can come out, which just makes me really want to work with the coaches and the team. How do we make this dude feel like he totally belongs here, which would lead to less energy on how do I belong and more energy around him being the player and doing the things that he was brought to this team to do. A player not performing, a player lacking commitment, or the player lacking confidence. And those are just a couple examples of things that I think as coaches we're working with on a weekly or monthly basis. I think back to my time as a coach, and these were a lot of the psychological and social and emotional coaching that I thought MI really could have helped me with. So in summary, MI says that people are the experts on their own life, and we got to help them raise that self-awareness. They possess unique strengths. We look at the players on our team, the athletes, and we're just like, they've got some gifts, and it's my job to help make them aware of that. People are fully capable of change. And when we set them up through open-ended questions and the spirit of MI, they can let us know how ready they are to change, and we can help them create the steps. A guiding style promotes autonomy. Again, going back to the self-determination theory around autonomy, competence, and relatedness, when we ask questions, we make it feel like they're in control of their life. And as a guide, we're the guest in their world. And then lastly, we get better at what we practice. So a lot of these are new skills. I'm encouraging everybody to go out there and practice the open-ended questions and the affirming. And then just like a technical skill, it's not a skill unless it holds up under pressure. So when the player brings us a challenge or confronts us with something and we feel like directing or telling or using some of that directiveness that maybe we're more comfortable with, see if we can notice ourselves in that moment shifting over to an open-ended question or a change there. So I know we're really coming in on time, but I will I'll stop here and answer any questions if there are some from the group.